You got fortunate, man. Most dudes like you fade into obscurity. That jab stung worse than any hit I've ever taken. And I've taken plenty. But it wasn't just the words that cut deep. It was the laugh. That sharp, grating cackle from across the table. Laura, my wife, my partner for 27 years, smirking over her wine like it was a riot. I sat there, fork stuck midair, a chunk of roast beef cooling, just watching the scene unfold. Ryan showed up 45 minutes late, acting like he was gracing us with his presence. Sporting a watch worth more than my first car and a suit screaming try hard, he slumped into his chair like he owned the joint. Legs splayed, chin up, he dove into some half-cocked tale about sealing a six-figure deal from a Miami rooftop bar. The guy hadn't even loosened his tie before bragging about his last quarter's earnings. Spoiler, he mentioned it twice. I didn't take the bait. I never do. That's the deal with guys like Ryan. They're loud because they're insecure. He boasted to mask the emptiness beneath. I know the type. Hell, I used to bankroll firms that ate guys like him for breakfast. But Laura, she didn't just put up with him. She egged him on, refilled his wine, chuckled at every lame quip, leaned in like he was a genius. I might as well have been wallpaper. A prop. Then came the dig. Right as I was slicing into my second portion, he nodded at me with that smug grin, scanned the table, and let it rip. You got fortunate, Mike. Let's be real, most guys like you stay nobodies. But hey, you snagged a woman like Laura, right? Gotta give credit. My knife froze mid-cut. I stared at the marbling in the beef. Red, raw, almost poetic. Laura laughed. Not a forced, polite giggle to keep things civil. No, this was a full, easy laugh. Like she bought it. Like the jab wasn't a jab. I looked at her. She didn't even glance my way. Ryan kept going. He rambled about how real men take risks, how his firm was diving into bold acquisitions, how connections trump talent. I'd heard this spiel before, from interns with flashy cufflinks, from guys who think LinkedIn is a personality, from kids who haven't been knocked down yet. The worst part? This was my house, my table. Every brick, every fork, every bottle of wine, paid for by a man they both just brushed off like I was some lucky nobody who tripped into a good life. Laura topped off his glass without a word to me. I set down my fork. My hunger was gone. Not from anger. Anger's too easy. No, this was colder, quieter. The kind of calm that comes when something snaps silently. A clean break. Ryan moved on. He always does. Back to tales about some startup CEO he partied with. A yacht he toured in Miami. A woman he flew to Vegas just for dinner. But I wasn't listening anymore. I studied the wood grain on the table. Every knot, every curve, every flaw. I built this table myself 15 years ago in the garage over 3 weekends and a case of lager. Laura called it rustic. She wanted something sleek from West Elm. I said no. I wanted something solid in the house. Now here I was, 40 inches from the woman who'd laughed at me, sitting across from the cousin she used to call a walking billboard when he couldn't keep a job. Funny how memory gets picky when cash shows up. I excused myself before dessert. Muttered something about a call. No one cared, not even Laura. I went to my office, locked the door, sat down, opened my laptop. There, buried 3 clicks deep behind 2 layers of encryption, was a file named Apex Ventures. I hadn't touched it in months. No need. It ran like clockwork. Silent, smooth, unseen. I clicked and grinned because while Ryan was busy peacocking in a $1,200 blazer, he'd stepped into a game he didn't even know was being played. And Laura, she laughed once. That was enough. Ryan's voice echoed down the hall long after I left the table. That loud, empty chatter that fills space for people scared of their own thoughts. He was hyping some fund, Hawk Peak Capital, I think, some boutique firm with a puffed-up name and an even more inflated ego. Exclusive, elite, totally under wraps, he said, as if secrecy meant importance. We cap at 10 partners and I was handpicked. The guy who backed me used to run Musk's West Coast deals. The only Musk Ryan knew was probably on X. I stood at the top of the stairs, out of sight, listening to him spout figures that sounded fake, clients that seemed invented, deals too glossy to be legit. But Laura, she was lapping it up like it was scripture. At one point, he mentioned grabbing early equity in a medtech startup, a breakthrough in spinal implants. And Laura actually gasped like he was delivering divine wisdom. She'd never gasped like that when I mentioned my own deals. Then again, I never shared much. I slipped back down when the talk shifted to crypto. Figured he'd be too deep in fantasy to notice me. He didn't. Just waved his wine glass and said, "Yo, Mike, next time I'm in Napa, maybe I'll bring you along for a tour of the vineyards we're eyeing for a buyout. Could be a blast. You ever been to Yountville?" Before I could reply, Laura giggled and said, "Mike's not into that fancy stuff. He's more of a beer and ball game guy." She said it like it was a punchline, like I was the punchline. And she refilled his glass again. I stuck around for dessert, barely watched them devour my creme brulee while comparing watches like teens flexing new kicks. I waited until Ryan left, giving my shoulder a pat on his way out with "We should chat sometime. I could coach you on building a brand." Coach me. The guy whose idea of a pitch deck was probably Comic Sans. Laura shut the door behind him and sighed like she'd just hosted a dignitary. "Ryan's killing it," she said, gathering plates. "He's grown so much." I didn't answer. I just started stacking dishes. Later, while she was brushing her teeth and humming some tune, I sat in my office. Dim light, one desk lamp. The air carried a faint cedar scent from the drawer where I keep my old journals. I pulled out my phone first, scrolled through contacts until I found the name, Vince. My old broker, retired now, chilling in Wyoming, still calls yearly to catch up and suggest bourbons. I deleted the number, not out of spite, but focus. Then I opened the laptop, entered the long password, hesitated at the second layer, and followed the old routine, fingerprint scan, voice key. Overkill, maybe, but when you've built something worth hiding, caution's just protocol. Folder opened. Apex Ventures. That name didn't exist in public records, not in filings, not in search engines, not in glossy boardroom slides. It was a phantom. And inside that phantom lived over $40 million in assets spread across shell companies, offshore accounts, and discrete funds most banks only whispered about. I didn't build Apex to boast. I built it to vanish, to stop explaining how I got here. No pitch decks, no investor pitches, no peer spin, just capital. I scrolled through holdings like flipping through an old journal. Logistics, automation firms, agricultural drone tech, a small stake in a biotech hub out of Austin. And there it was. Line item 72B, Hawk Peak Capital. I clicked it. Ownership 17.6% held through a proxy firm in Alberta, funneled via a quiet trust in Nevada, controlled by a Cayman shell. On paper, I was 3 shadows removed. But I held it, and suddenly Ryan's voice, the one that mocked, that preached, that laughed at his own ignorance, felt tiny in my mind. I stared at the screen for a bit. Then I opened the employee database link, requested access to the latest roster, and muttered, "Let's see how far that coaching offer goes." 18 years ago, I sold everything under a name I don't even use anymore. The company was called Nexlify. We built enterprise-grade middleware, the kind of tech that never hit headlines but quietly kept the Fortune 500 running. At its peak, we had a dozen clients with names that turned heads. But I didn't build it for clout. I built it because I loved puzzles, quiet puzzles, the kind only a few in a room get. When acquisition talks started, I hired 2 lawyers, one shell company in Calgary, and a fixer who ensured my name wouldn't show up in any documents. Nexlify was swallowed by a conglomerate called Pinnacle Data Holdings. I walked away with just under $14 million liquid. Laura never asked for specifics. She was more worried about how early retirement looked to her folks. I told her I'd consult, invest, take time to sort things out. She never pressed again. With that money, I didn't buy a yacht. I bought quiet. I built Apex Ventures from scratch in Hidden Ink, offshore accounts, nominee directors, P.O. boxes in places most can't spell. If you peeled back every layer, you'd find my name, but you'd need to cross hell and 29 jurisdictions to do it. I bought pieces of the world, not flashy ones, not tech darlings or fitness apps. I went for warehouses, cold chain logistics, trucking software, gritty businesses. I wanted assets that didn't crave spotlight. I moved like a ghost. Apex Ventures never issued a press release. We didn't exist for headlines. We existed for leverage. Back in my office now, the screens glow steady and soft. I watched the internal dashboard load. It always took a minute to decrypt the proxy server. Another safeguard. Paranoia's a talent, not a fault when you've got something worth protecting. Finally, the interface popped up. Hawkpeak Capital. I clicked through. 3 layers in the chain. A boutique firm in Dallas, all smiles and cheap cologne, a shell holding in Toronto, a family trust tied to a P.O. box in the Caymans. Apex held the controlling stake at the top, 62%. Technically, they worked for me, every employee, every asset, every glass-walled office with fancy coffee machines, including Ryan. I leaned back, cracking my knuckles. My pulse didn't jump. No rush, just that cool hum I used to feel in server rooms when all the lights blinked green. Everything in sync, everything mine. I tapped my headset and called the one person who still had my direct line. Simon, I said. His voice came on, smooth and British, though he's been in Charlotte for a decade. Yes, Mr. Callahan. Send me the full employee roster for Hawkpeak. Use the trustee access. I want names, hire dates, partner levels, everything. A brief pause. Simon never asks why. That's why I kept him. Right away, sir. Any specific reason? I smirked. Not that he could see. Just curious who's sipping my profits. He gave a soft chuckle. Understood. It'll be in your secure inbox within the hour. I hung up. Outside, the motion light flicked on, probably a possum. But for a moment it felt cinematic, like the stage was set. I stared at the dark window, saw my reflection, older maybe, but not softer. And behind that reflection, layers, shadows, ownership masked as nothing. People like Ryan, they skate on the surface. They were success like a cheap costume. Loud, tacky, off the rack. But power doesn't shout. It signs checks and voids them. And I was about to remind a certain junior partner that the man he mocked over roast beef didn't just own the table. He owned the whole damn building. The roster landed in my inbox exactly 46 minutes after I hung up with Simon. Password locked, 2-factor encrypted, view only. Just how I like it. I opened it with a quiet thrill, like a man unfolding plans to a house he knew was already burning. Ryan Kessler, line 14. Junior partner, hired 9 months ago. No equity yet, but on the fast track. Strong endorsements, the note said. Of course, endorsements from people trading favors. People who skip the fine print. I clicked into his onboarding file. Most of it was standard: background check, education, prior jobs, non-disclosure, signed on time. But 3 pages in, something caught. Not a glaring issue. Not yet. Just a line that didn't line up. Ryan claimed he left his last role at a fintech consultancy in Boston after wrapping a project. Yet the HR notes from Hawkpeak said amicable exit post-merger restructuring. 2 stories, both too neat, too glossy. I leaned in. A good lie always has smooth edges. The mess is usually tucked in the corners. I pulled a secondary file. Internal compliance cross-check. Hawkpeak uses a third-party service to vet hires against a financial behavior database buried in legal jargon. Most junior partners glide through because no one expects them to matter yet. Ryan glided, but someone had flagged a footnote, an old complaint from a Boston client questioning a valuation Ryan had penned. It went nowhere, settled quietly. But I know the stench of decay under a fresh coat of paint. I grabbed my notebook and jotted 1 word in the margin. Leverage. I didn't need to crush Ryan. That's the rookie play. Flashy revenge burns out fast. I needed to tip the right piece. Let the system chew him up. I dialed a number few even know exists. The direct line to Hawk Peak's internal compliance office. Not the main desk. Not legal. The woman who handles things too delicate for paper. She picked up, voice crisp and professional. Karen Holt. Miss Holt, I said calmly. This is MC Callahan, beneficiary trustee, Apex Ventures. Silence. Then a small, sharp breath. She knew the name, felt the weight. How can I help you, Mr. Callahan? No formal inquiry. Just a heads up. Line 14 on your latest partner roster. There's a mismatch in the exit story. Probably nothing, but if I were you, I'd dig into the client logs from his final quarter in Boston. Check for a note tied to Capstone Group. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, noted. No goodbyes. We didn't need them. In this game, silence seals the deal. I closed the file, shut the laptop. Outside, the sprinklers kicked on. Steady, rhythmic, exact. Inside, I felt it. That slow snap of something locking into place. Not drama, not a rush, just the cold satisfaction of turning the first gear. By noon the next day, I got a one-line update from Simon. Internal compliance audit launched. HR flagged onboarding inconsistency. Investigation underway. That was all I needed. The wheel was spinning. And Ryan, for all his bluster, his cologne, his champagne boasts, and his coaching fantasies, was now standing on a trapdoor. He just hadn't heard the creak yet. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Pacific, time to catch the East Coast team still buzzing from coffee, but late enough to avoid any claims of being caught off guard. The invite came from a plain email linked to Apex Ventures' legal contact in the Caymans, signed only as M. Callahan, beneficiary trustee. No flair, no fuss. The board replied in under an hour. Confirmed. I dressed deliberately. Clean white shirt, no tie, the same navy blazer I wore when the Nexlify deal closed. I wasn't there to dazzle them. Just to remind them. Power doesn't announce itself. It walks in and takes the head seat. At 9:59 sharp, I joined the call. 7 faces filled the screen. 5 board members, 1 legal advisor, and an assistant scribbling notes like her job depended on it. The video boxes shrank them down, made them seem smaller. All but the man in the center, Gerald Klein, board chairman, former private equity guru with a voice that turned every sentence into a keynote. I hadn't seen him in years, but that perfect Windsor knot and polished grin were unmistakable. He leaned in. Well, I'll be damned. Mike. I nodded slightly. Good to see you, Gerald. You've been off the grid. Last I saw you, you were explaining cloud infrastructure to a charity board. That was, 15 years back? We'd both been donors, him loudly, me through a proxy. Still think it matters, I said. But I'm not here to chat. The mood shifted. A few postures straightened. The assistant's typing picked up. Gerald cleared his throat. Fair enough. What's Apex Ventures got for us today? I'd like a review of recent hires, I said evenly. Silence. One board member frowned. That's unusual from your side. Any specific issue? No formal problem, I said, pausing just long enough to let it sink in. Just noticed some patterns. Minor alignment issues in junior partner onboarding. A standard audit would be wise. I kept my tone steady, didn't point fingers, but everyone on that call knew this wasn't a casual ask. It wasn't even a request. It was a loaded gun on the table, safety on, but impossible to ignore. Gerald adjusted his glasses. We take these things seriously. Any specific hire you want us to look at? No. That'd undermine the point, wouldn't it? A board member in the corner nodded slowly, the kind of nod that hides a mental scan for buried secrets. I trust, I added, this stays internal and thorough for now. That for now carried the weight. Gerald's smile tightened. It's handled. The assistant typed furiously, then glanced up like she was double-checking my name. Thanks for your time, I said, and left the call. No theatrics, no accusations, just a quiet word in a sealed room with 7 people who knew a shadow investor's voice demands attention. Back in my office, I poured a finger of whiskey into a glass I hadn't used in years. Let it sit. Across the room, my old whiteboard still held half-finished formulas from a side project I dropped last fall. Laura once asked what it was about. I said I was tinkering with market trends. She called it quirky. As I sipped, I thought of Ryan. He didn't know it yet, but he was under a lens now, one you can't talk your way out of. All I'd done was point to him without naming him. The echo would do the rest, and I'd watch from 3 steps removed, where real control lies, where whispers move mountains. Ryan's call came just past noon. Laura had the phone on speaker, naturally, while slicing an apple into neat, thin slices like the world was perfectly in order. "Mic around." Ryan's voice had a shake he couldn't mask. "He's in his office," Laura said, her tone light, almost indifferent. "What's up?" They hauled me into a meeting. Out of nowhere. HR, some compliance woman, and this board guy, Connors or something, saying they've got routine concerns about my onboarding file. What's that supposed to mean? Laura's knife paused mid-slice. I watched her hand hover, blade pointing nowhere. Ryan kept going, his voice sharper now. "They had documents, Laura. Highlighted lines. Old job dates not lining up. A side LLC I forgot to close out. It's nothing, right? It's inactive." And they were quoting stuff I barely recall from my interview, like they had a script. Laura glanced at my shut office door, then down at the apple slices, as if they'd offer answers. "It's probably just standard stuff, no?" "No, it's not standard. They were digging like I'm already screwed and they just need me to admit it. This is bad. I've been there 9 months, Laura. I was on the fast track. I need this job." She stared at the phone, then carried it to my door. Knocked twice. "Mike, Ryan's on. Says there's trouble at his work." I didn't look up from my laptop, just hid the portfolio tracker and turned to her with the blank stare she always read as disinterest. "What kind of trouble?" she faltered. "Compliance, some meeting." "He's rattled." I took a slow sip of water, let the silence linger, then said, "Sounds like a mess." She blinked. "That's all." I shrugged. "Not much to say. If he's clean, it'll blow over. If he's not..." I left it there. She walked out without another word, but her shoulders were tense, stiffer than before. She hated not knowing what I knew. Back on the call, she tried to calm Ryan. Hollow words, vague comforts. I heard her through the wall. "Probably a mix-up. Maybe it's a random check. I'm sure it's not a big deal." But her voice carried it now. Uncertainty. That bitter edge behind forced calm. Meanwhile, Ryan was spiraling. "They said I'd have another meeting once legal reviews my outside partnerships." What does that even mean? I haven't done anything shady. That's always the first panic. Not guilt, control. And Ryan, for the first time in ages, wasn't steering. That old LLC he forgot to close? Still active in state records, still listing him as owner, with a 3-month reporting gap 2 years back. Right when he swore he was fully committed to another job. The numbers weren't even that bad, just off enough. The kind of slip no one spots unless someone points it out. And I'd given them the thread. Now Ryan was pulling it, desperate to stop the unraveling. That night, Laura was quieter than usual. She poked at her salad, kept glancing at her phone, didn't bring up Ryan until we were washing dishes. "You think he'll be fine?" I dried a plate, set it on the rack. "Depends on how many resumes he's juggled in the last 5 years, I said coolly, "and how sharp his memory is for lies." She didn't reply, just stood there, towel in hand, staring out the kitchen window into the night. where the fractures were hidden but spreading. Ryan didn't go quietly. That was never his style. Per the internal memo slipped to my secure inbox, the final meeting was set for 3:45 p.m. on a Wednesday, timed carefully. Late enough for the office to be distracted. Less chance of a spectacle. But with Ryan, a spectacle was guaranteed. He showed up brash, dressed louder than ever. Dark suit, bright teal tie, the Rolex with the diamond ticks. Probably thought he was facing a light reprimand, maybe a performance plan with a few stern words. He had no clue he was already done. The HR lead was there. So was Karen Holt from compliance. And Stephen Connors, the board member Ryan barely recalled last week, sat at the table's head, looking every bit like a man who'd perfected the art of delivering grim news. They didn't raise voices. They didn't point fingers. They laid out the issues. Inconsistent records, undisclosed ownership of an active side entity, a conflict of interest clause he'd signed without a glance. It wasn't illegal? Not exactly. But in a firm handling investor funds with kid gloves, it was catastrophic. He pushed back, naturally. Said the LLC was dead. Claimed a Boston client issue was overblown. Said everyone tweaks a title or two to stay in the game. They listened, then slid the letter across. Effective immediately, termination without severance. Access cut off. All digital accounts already locked. A courier would deliver his personal items in a sealed box by day's end. The only thing they let him keep was his last expense receipt for a $64 lunch he charged 2 days prior, now a bitter footnote. Security didn't walk him out. Too public. But they did guide him to the lobby. Courteously. He left muttering, voice cracking, face flushed and shaking. He called Laura 3 times in the next hour. She didn't pick up because she was with me at the lake house. My phone pinged around 6:10 p.m. I was on the back deck watching the lake's surface ripple in slow, smooth waves. A lone kayak glided across the far shore, silent against the dusk. I sipped black coffee with a dash of bourbon and opened my inbox without rush. Subject, termination processed HPC. Short, sterile. The email held a brief note from Simon. As of 3:58 p.m. Eastern, Ryan Kessler is no longer employed by Hawk Peak Capital. Records archived. No further action required. Regards, S. I stared at it for a moment. No rush of victory, no smirk, just quiet. That deep, flawless quiet after a symphony's final chord when the sound fades but its weight hangs in the air. Laura was warming leftovers. She didn't know yet. She'd hear soon enough. Maybe from Ryan. Maybe from the family group chat she checks too much. Maybe from that nagging instinct starting to whisper that the man she laughed at over dinner wasn't quite who she thought. For now, I watched the lake stretch out, vast, calm, and deep, and thought, that's one less braggart mistaking noise for worth and one less person laughing at the wrong guy. It was her idea. Let's host another dinner, Laura said, overly cheerful as if the ground between us hadn't shifted. It's been too long since we had everyone over. Her voice was off, like a senator brushing off a headline, but I nodded, said, sounds good, and went back to my book. Let her play hostess. Let her try to mend the fractures with napkins and a cold Sauvignon Blanc. She texted Ryan 3 times that week. No reply. She didn't bring it up, but I saw his name flash on her phone when she thought I was distracted. One message lingered, unread for 3 days. You okay? Can we talk? It never turned blue. By Saturday night, the dining room mirrored the last gathering. Same cloth runner, same candles, same herb-crusted chicken I'd prepped on autopilot. The difference, the quiet. A fragile edge undercut the chatter like everyone sensed a taut wire running through the room but couldn't trace its path. Her cousin Sarah asked first, midway through the appetizers. Where's Ryan tonight? Thought he never missed free drinks. Laura stiffened. Just a moment, her fork pausing midair. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. Looked up steadily. He's not with Hawk Peak anymore. The room froze. Sarah blinked. What? I said it again, clear and calm. Ryan. He's no longer at Hawk Peak. Laura turned her head toward me slowly. Her lips were shut, but her eyes screamed. That awful math when a truth isn't lied about but exposed. She started to speak, then stopped. Her uncle gave a low whistle. No kidding? I thought he just got a big promotion. He did, I said. It didn't stick. No one asked how I knew. Not yet. Families cling to the easiest version of the truth until it's unavoidable. Someone cleared their throat. Sarah glanced at Laura. You didn't know? I knew something was off, Laura faltered. But he hasn't been answering my calls. That was when it shifted. Subtle, silent, but undeniable. The change. They stopped seeing her as the one in the know and started looking at me. No one said it. They didn't need to. The way I spoke, the steady calm, the certainty that comes from facts, not rumors, it rewrote the room. I wasn't just the quiet spouse anymore. I wasn't the guy who lucked into a vibrant wife. I was the one who knew things, who saw the board move and played without a sound. And Laura, she looked like she'd stepped into a scene after the curtains had fallen. The rest of the dinner limped along. There was forced laughter. Someone mentioned their kid's piano recital. A glass clinked, but the spark was gone. I could see Laura calculating in real time. The emails, the meeting, the board, M. Callahan. She hadn't asked about the name. Not yet, but I saw it in her eyes. The battle between ignorance and the urge to know. Later, while stacking the dishwasher, she finally spoke. You're awfully certain about Ryan. I slid a plate into the rack. I am. Another pause. Then, how? I shut the dishwasher gently, dried my hands, met her eyes. Ever wonder what I really did before I retired? She didn't answer. She didn't need to because, for the first time in our marriage, Laura didn't see a man who got lucky. She saw a man she'd never truly known, and he wasn't laughing. The text came just past midnight. Laura's phone glowed on the nightstand, a beacon in the dark like a signal from a sinking ship. She glanced at it, half asleep, then sat up when she saw the name. Ryan. She opened it fast. Read it twice, then again slower. Who is your husband really? No punctuation, just raw, jagged panic. She didn't speak at first, just sat in bed clutching the phone like it might scorch her if she held it too tight. I was in the armchair by the window, as I often was when sleep didn't call, flipping through an old notebook I kept for nights like these. Still nights. Nights when masks fell. She turned to me. Her voice was quiet but steady. Mike. I waited. She groped for the right words, then gave up. What did you do to him? I didn't answer. Just closed the notebook, set it down, walked to the old cabinet in the corner. Third drawer, a key tucked behind a hidden panel. She watched me like someone seeing a sleight of hand they'd missed for years. I opened the drawer slowly, pulled out a plain leather folder, no labels, just heft. Turned, handed it to her. Don't read it here, I said. Take it to the office. You'll want a table. She didn't argue, just took it like accepting a sentence. Two hands, silent, eyes unsure. Downstairs, the office light flicked on 5 minutes later. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. She was in there for hours. I heard the faint rustle of pages, the occasional creak of the chair on the wood floor. Once, a single sharp word slipped out, hushed but raw. The sound of someone realizing the map they'd trusted for 20 years had led them astray. Inside the folder, 5 pages, ownership charts, webs of holding companies, shell entities stacked like Russian dolls leading to Apex Ventures, a trust record naming M. Callahan as beneficiary trustee, and at the top, a cover letter, typed, dated. Signed in ink. Michael Callahan, sole creator and owner of Apex Ventures. The letter was brief, factual, no emotion, just truth. The name changes, the sale, the secrecy, the why. At the end, if you're reading this, you either asked the wrong question or finally asked the right one. She came upstairs around 2 a.m., didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway, folder still in hand. You built all that? Not really a question. Yes. She nodded slowly. And you let me think. That I retired early because I got lucky. I tilted my head. I didn't let you. You picked that story. Another silence. Then, Ryan thinks you set him up. I met her gaze. I didn't set him up. I just stopped shielding him from his own mess. She sank onto the edge of the bed, like her legs weren't sure they'd hold. Why now? I watched her for a beat, then said, because you laughed. She flinched just a little. Not theatrical. Just enough. I've been quiet a long time, Laura. But don't confuse quiet with blind. She didn't speak after that. Just stared at the folder in her lap, at the fragments of a man she'd lived with for 27 years and somehow never really saw. Outside, the wind stirred, and inside, Laura Callahan realized she hadn't married a man who stumbled into her world. She'd married a man who let her live in his. The sun rose sharp that morning. No haze, no sound, just the drone of the mower and the smell of fresh grass cutting through the cool air like lime. I'd always liked mowing. Simple, rhythmic, a task no one interrupts. Until that Sunday. I saw him the moment he rounded the corner. Ryan, standing at the driveway's edge, like a man who just crawled from a wreck and wasn't sure if the dust had settled. He looked rough, jacket creased, shirt half-tucked, eyes red and swollen. The sunglasses didn't hide it. They just made him look like a kid trying to wear a man's face after losing a fight with someone bigger, quieter. I didn't stop mowing, just turned the wheel and kept going. The lawn's lines didn't care who stood there. He waited, probably thought I'd give him an opening. I didn't. Finally, he stepped onto the grass, walking with that same cocky lean. Only now it wavered. Now it dragged. You set me up. He said it like it was a breakthrough, like it carried weight. I cut another row. Everything. The compliance check, the LLC. You made them look. Another row. You ruined me, he snapped, voice breaking. You could have just talked to me. You didn't have to. I killed the engine. The quiet hit hard. I turned, leaned on the handle, looked him in the eye for the first time since that dinner. He twitched just a bit. Maybe the sun. Maybe something else. I didn't raise my voice, didn't shift my tone. I own what you mocked. A beat passed. His mouth opened, ready to fire back. And I remember, I added, who laughed. His breath hitched. I saw it, that moment when truth lands. Not like a fist, but like cold water down the back. I turned the mower, fired it up, and left him standing on grass I paid for, by a house he'd once called cozy. Behind me, no footsteps, no comeback, just the hum of a man frozen in silence, realizing he'd never been in the same league. Inside, Laura watched from the window. She didn't speak when I came in, didn't ask what he said. She didn't need to because the truth was already buzzing under her feet. This time, no dinner party, no wine, no laughter, just a silent house. And the man she laughed at mowing the lawn he owned.